The 88mm flak gun and its different variants was the most famous of all artillery pieces employed by the Wehrmacht in the Second World War. Indeed, it was, in all probability, the most famous, if not infamous, artillery piece of the entire conflict. While this reputation was certainly cultivated by very assiduous propaganda, it is nevertheless the case that it was an exceptionally versatile weapon, being employed in the anti-aircraft, anti-tank role, and as conventional artillery with equal ability. Its reputation amongst Germany's enemies was notorious. There is a famous story originally published in the US Stars and Stripes which dates from the fall of Tunisia in 1943 and shows a US intelligence officer interrogating German prisoners. He assures a GI standing near and observing the process, "Don't worry, if I find the one what invented the 88, I'll let you know." It was the mounting of this weapon in its modified and developed forms that made the Tiger I and Tiger II tanks and Nashorn tank destroyers such formidable armoured fighting vehicles. It was Goering's abiding faith in the effectiveness of the 88 in the anti-aircraft role that led him to claim that no enemy aircraft would ever penetrate the airspace of the Reich. Although effective in this role, it is clear that the 88mm was actually no better than its Allied contemporaries, such as the British 3.7-inch anti-aircraft gun, which had a better performance in ceiling, weight of shell, and also ground range. It was in the Western Desert that the 88 began to acquire its fearsome reputation in the anti-tank role. Its first appearance in this theatre was noted outside of Tobruk in April 1941. Towed by an 8-ton half-track, the 88 was frequently employed in the anti-tank role while still on its real cruciform chassis. Its principal disadvantage then lay in its height, which was some 6 feet 10 inches. In the desert, its greatest effectiveness in the anti-tank role came when its crews had time to dig gun pits. Whilst these had to be large, the gun then became, in the words of a British report, extremely difficult to detect at 1,000 yards range. The fortuitous decision to equip the 88mm with armor-piercing ammunition and optical direct first sights dates back to the time of the Spanish Civil War, when the initial model of the 88, the flak 18, was tested in action for the first time. The primary armor-piercing shell contained a small charge to explode after penetration. Armor plate up to 108mm thick could be penetrated at up to 1,100 yards. The gun's ability to penetrate armour of such thickness and at such a range not only made any British tank in the desert vulnerable, it made the 88mm the only weapon easily able to deal with the formidable new T-34 and KV series of heavy tanks when encountered in Russia in 1941. The 88 was also frequently employed in the conventional artillery role. These Waffen-SS troopers are serving their pieces in southern Russia in the late summer of 1943. Albert Speer, Hitler's industrial minister, was later to claim that the sheer quantity of resources retained in Germany to defend it from the US and British bomber offensive constituted the Second Front a long time before the Allied landings in France. Indeed, by the autumn 1943, the need to protect the cities of Germany had seen an extremely large concentration of anti-aircraft weapons, which could have been better employed on the battlefields in Russia and elsewhere. By October 1943, no fewer than 23 heavy batteries, amounting to some 130 88mm guns, were ringing the city of Schweinfurt. By war's end, no fewer than 30 anti-aircraft divisions were protecting Germany. .88 batteries provided a defensive umbrella for German and Italian forces retreating from Sicily across the Straits of Messina in August 1943. The barrage thrown up by the German batteries, expending a prodigious amount of ammunition, allowed no fewer than 102,000 troops to be slipped across the straits in the face of Allied bombing raids. Allies encountered the 88 throughout the Italian campaign. As the Germans often emplaced their guns in well-prepared defensive positions, the 88 once more emerged as a formidable weapon. From Salerno through to Cassino, the Germans used their 88s to delay the Allied advance. It was in the fighting around the Great Monastery in early 1944 that film of 88 shooting at Allied Sherman tanks was taken. The 88 often proved to be the nemesis of this Allied tank, which by this date and through to war's end was to constitute the primary weapon in the Allied tank forces. The frontal armour of the Sherman was vulnerable to penetration to the 88 from some considerable distance. Whether encountered as an artillery piece or when mounted on tanks and self-propelled guns, this particular weapon was to prove exceedingly dangerous to all Allied AFVs. Given its effectiveness, it would be perfectly reasonable to suppose that the 88mm flak 18 was actually a very new design. In fact, it can be traced back to 1925, and although Krupp and Rheinmetall did experimental work in Germany, much of the design was undertaken by Germans seconded to work at the Bofors factory in Sweden. A prototype was then built in Germany and the gun entered service in 1933. It was blooded in the Spanish Civil War and was most successful. In this sequence, 88mm flak 36 provide air cover to German ground forces in western Russia in 1944. By that period, the Soviets had local air superiority wherever the Red Air Force chose to fly, so the provision of large numbers of flak weapons of different calibers became essential for the Germans. The ground forces here are under attack by Ilyushin II Sturmovix. Although German forces had been driven from the Caucasus following their failed attempt to secure the oil fields there in the 1942 summer campaign, Hitler had insisted on retaining a large bridgehead in the Kuban Peninsula. When the military situation improved, he intended to make a second attempt to secure this vital economic resource. Until that time, the Kuban bridgehead, known as the Gotenkopf or Goat's Head position, had to be constantly resupplied across the Kerch Straits. This arterial route was naturally a prime target for the Soviet Air Force. In consequence, the Germans had ringed the port on the Kuban side with extremely dense, light and heavy flak defences, and it is these that are seen in action here. On this occasion, IL-2 Sturmovix are engaged in medium and low-level strikes on the port facilities. 20mm and 88mm flak guns provide a heavy barrage which takes its toll on a number of the Soviet aircraft. This rare sequence of colour film, a Soviet air attack on a German air and seaplane base in northern Norway in 1943 is met by heavy anti-aircraft fire from light 20mm flak and a battery of the ubiquitous 88mm guns. The sequence is effective in showing the communications link between the range-finding team and the gun layers. The relevant information on height, distance and so forth is relayed by radio to gunners who then target the Soviet attackers and fire the guns. Once again, the 88s are successful and they bring down one of the Soviet attackers.